I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for calling this meeting today. Thank you too to the Under-Secretary General and to the Assistant Secretary General for their briefings. The Secretariat, the UN, UNIMIG are doing a difficult job in very difficult circumstances. And I'd like, before beginning my remarks, to reject the allegation by the Russian ambassador that the Secretariat and the Under-Secretary General in particular are biased. We have a convention in this Council that we rely on the information given to us by the Secretariat. An attack on the Secretariat is an attack on the institutions of the UN. And Russia, which is fast becoming a party to the conflict, is ill-placed to make such a claim, and it does it no credit. Mr. President, as others have said, we're witnessing a grave escalation of the situation in Georgia. Further fighting has happened overnight, and there has been further Russian bombing of Georgian territory. Russian naval vessels have moved closer, and there are media reports that they are tasked with preventing supplies to Georgia, and there are concerns that supplies may not get through to other countries in the Caucasus. Overnight, Russian bombing included an attack on a military airfield near the civilian airport outside Tbilisi. In a meeting on the 10th of August with the EU, OSCE and US delegation, the Georgian foreign minister confirmed that the Georgian side has pulled back from most of South Ossetia and that Georgia has disengaged Russian forces. She also said that Russian forces have told Georgia to negotiate a ceasefire with the proper person. Saakashvili has tried to contact Putin, but we understand there has been no reply for several hours, and we heard from Ambassador Churkin why that is the case. I'll merely make the obvious point, Mr. President, that if leaders are not prepared to talk to each other, it's rather hard to see how peace efforts can move forward. We have heard disturbing reports that there will only be a ceasefire once the Georgians have committed to a non-use of force agreement and withdrawn completely from South Ossetia. Meanwhile, there are reports, as other speakers have referred to, of Russian forces striking Zugdidi in Georgia proper and of Abkhaz armed personnel movements. Mr. President, we appreciate that it is difficult to get authoritative accounts of what is happening on the ground, as UNIMIG has been forced to pull back, and Russian forces throughout Georgia have, through their actions on the ground, caused international monitors to have to leave. Our embassy is having trouble getting access to its own premises in Tbilisi because of the Russian actions, and we understand that there are foreign nationals, including British nationals, who may be trapped in parts of the conflict zone. We look to all the competence to protect foreign nationals and other civilians. We will need corridors so that they can be safely evacuated, and we hold all the combatants responsible for the safety of our citizens. Mr. President, Ambassador Churkin says there is no military solution, but we heard this morning from the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Karasin that the situation requires, and he used the present tense, a military intervention. We also heard from Prime Minister Putin about a, quote, fatal blow being delivered to the territorial integrity of Georgia. Mr. President, we are witnessing, it appears, a grave violation of Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russian forces have certainly violated respect for the international norms of peacekeeping, and it is a gross distortion of Russia to claim peacekeeping duties for their action. Those actions have gone beyond any reasonable, proportionate response. Mr. President, instead of Cold War rhetoric, we need the Russian representatives to give us answers to these questions. Why can Russia not support a cessation of hostilities and a withdrawal of all armed personnel, including their own regular and irregular forces, to positions pertaining on the 6th of August? What are Russian political and military intentions in respect of Georgia, and what are Russian political and military intentions in respect of Abkhazia and South Ossetia in Georgia once the fighting has stopped? What we have heard today from the Secretariat, Mr. President, casts doubt on Russians' claims that their actions are humanitarian or designed to uphold peace and security in the Caucasus. And I'd like also, Mr. President, to reject the equivalence the Russian ambassador sought to establish between the situation in Georgia and that in Kosovo in 1998 and 1999. The situations are very different. But if the Russian actions are reminiscent of any party in that conflict, Mr. President, it is certainly not NATO who their actions remind us of. Mr. President, as other speakers have said, we endorse the strong statement of the Secretary-General last night. I would like to echo what the French Presidency of the European Union said. We repeat our calls here in the Chamber for an immediate and unconditional end by all parties, irregular and regular forces, to hostilities. We call on Russian and Georgian sides and all the other parties to engage with the international mediation efforts, those led by the EU and OSCE and US, to withdraw to positions before 6th of August, and we call for all to respect the principles of the UN Charter, and we call for Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity to be respected. We also call for humanitarian needs to be addressed, but, Mr. President, this must not be used as a pretext by the Russian authorities to keep their forces on Georgian territory or to insert further troops. We need urgently to establish an international presence on the ground to assist efforts at peace, monitor the ceasefire, and help protect civilians. In respect of Abkhazia and Georgia, we express our strong support of UNAMIG and condemn hostilities in and around Abkhazia. These are in contravention of the ceasefire agreement of 1994. If it is indeed the case that Russian forces are moving on Zugdidi, then they should leave. All parties should honour their obligations under previous UNSC resolutions on Abkhazia. And it is extremely concerning that there are reports of CIS peacekeepers doing nothing to stop or inhibit offensive movements by Abkhaz armed personnel. This too, Mr. President, vitiates the purpose of international peacekeeping. We call on Russia to use her influence over those in Abkhazia who are intent on broadening the conflict. Finally, Mr. President, we've heard from a couple of delegations here this morning that they propose to bring forward action in the Security Council to support a cessation of hostilities. My government, Mr. President, will do everything it can to support those moves. Thank you.